welcome everybody to the second leg of the Itonics masterclasses. Today we're looking at pictures of the future, and I'm very happy that we have some people who come back, and I see some from familiar names. And yeah, I think today we're very excited to take a second step and be more practical in the way in which we are approaching this idea of innovation management. And so, yeah, we're really looking forward to engaging with you folks and having the conversation as we did last week. So I am very keen, before we even get into the agreements and the recap, just to get people to say in the chat one word that they're expected to get out of today's session. We did it last week and there were some fantastic suggestions. And so I'm hoping from you folks to get a sense of what from the pictures of the future session you folks are hoping to get out of the session. So I'll give you a minute to maybe put something in the chat, and then I can read those and then we can move on. Okay, so a couple are coming in. Clarity, scenario building, imagination, that's a good one. Methodology is a big one. These are great. Are there any other thoughts that people have, what they want to get from today's session? Yeah, so we hope that today's session are able to speak to some of these key phrases that you folks are hoping to get out of the systematic approach, something that Vince is saying. And we hope that today's conversation really builds from last week and allows you folks to think critically around where your strategization within innovation management comes in. And so just to recap some housekeeping from last week, again, in our minds, each session stands on its own, but it's iterative from the previous one. So please stay with us for the entire long haul, 5 sessions, 45 minutes each. We trust that it honestly will be worth it. We want this to be conversational, so the chat is open as it was last week. Some fantastic questions came up, and we just hope you folks still engage the way that you did last week. And as we did last week, we're going to be sending you a mailer afterwards, and we want it to be very clear that the learning shouldn't stop here, but rather this should be a springboard for you folks to think critically around what exactly innovation management is to you and how exactly you can apply the lessons that we spoke about in this session. Something else I just wanted to say is the real value of this is engaging one another. And I think the more you do that and the more we can sort of have a very fruitful conversation as we did last week. And so speaking of last week, I just want to briefly recap what we spoke about and just briefly recap what was discussed. So Tassilo, who's our senior innovation consultant, as well as Rachel Ramsey, who's facing going to see again today, we spoke about COFM, and we spoke about the idea of COFM in relation to the environmental scanning process, and at Itonics, how that is our first step in the entire foresight and strategy funnel. And we had a very great discussion speaking about what exactly are the benefits of environmental scanning, and also this whole idea of where exactly the user falls into this whole idea, and how exactly you can use environmental scanning as sort of that first approach in your innovation management. Another thing that we spoke about are the different environmental scanning activities, the what and the how. And Tassilo really had a thorough discussion around trend scouting, tech scouting, capability supervision, as well as competitor watch. And so we hope that this is sort of ringing a bell and jogging your memory in terms of the discussion that we had last week. I'm not entirely sure if people remember, but this was also a slide that we had around the foresight process and the user role in the story. That was discussed as well at length by both Tassilo and Rachel. And of course, at the end, we had the ratings and evaluation that took place with Tassilo showing us exactly how we rate trends, how we look to their impact, and how exactly they have a strategic fit within your organization. And so what we want to remind you of is that everything that we just showed you now was sent to you in a mailer last week, as well as the video of the session that we had last week. So if you want to jog your memory after today's session and maybe make a connection between what was spoken about last week and what shall be discussed today, it's there in your inbox. So please feel free to dive into that after today's session. So with that in mind, let's talk about today's session, pictures of the future. And so what we're hoping to talk about with pictures of the future is understanding how the idea of pictures of the future has to play a role in developing resiliency within one's strategic operations, understanding the key drivers that influence future outcomes, and seeing the work that goes into a scenario planning process. What exactly are the steps that are inherent in that process? What exactly are the fundamentals of scenario-based strategizing? And then this idea of stress testing. What is stress testing, and how exactly do you use stress testing to prepare for the future? And so basically the main thesis statement for today's session is sort of trying to think, how can teams establish best practice and processes and activities to use relevant environmental scanning findings as the basis of scenario development to create different responses that hold strategic relevance to the success of the organization's future. That might sound like a mouthful, but trust me, our experts today will make it a lot simpler for you and a lot more practical. And with that in mind, I would like to introduce our panelists and our experts today. And so I'll start off with Michelle Beale, who's General Manager of ITONICS Cape Town. So Michelle, over to you.
Thanks, Lita. So anyone who hasn't had an introduction from you before, I am currently managing the Cape Town team, but actually get my hands quite dirty in terms of working together with the crew here in terms of content. So that pertains to research, creation, and marketing. And it's a really exciting opportunity to dive into the world of scenarios, because this is a place where we can really expand our imaginations. Thanks, Lita.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Great introduction. And so the second person that we're introducing, I think, is a familiar face to all of us. She was Tassilo's sparring partner last week, and that's Rachel Rams. But Rachel, just in case we have some new faces who aren't familiar with you and the fantastic work that you do at Smollen, could you just give a bit of a summary of your role?
Yes, thanks, Tassilo. Hi again, everyone. For those that are new this week, I'm Rachel. I'm an innovation manager at Smollen. Just a bit of context, Smollen, we're a global commerce solutions company with our headquarters here in South Africa. We really work to connect people, brands, and opportunities. And our core service offering is retail merchandising. And our clients include the likes of Unilever, PepsiCo, Heineken, and Samsung. More specifically, I joined Smollen with a strong background in design thinking and corporate innovation. I studied design in the UK, and after working for 3 years in a design studio, I transitioned to a global innovation consultancy. First as an analyst and then as a project lead, I worked on projects with large corporates across industries such as automotive, retail, insurance, food and beverage, and chemicals. Focusing on the front end of innovation, I help clients uncover both where to play and how to win through a really collaborative innovation process that harnesses strategic thinking and framework of design of futures thinking, and then also the consumer-centric methodologies of design thinking. I specialize in both constructing and facilitating workshops for and with clients. But now at Smollen, I really have the great privilege of growing and embedding the culture and capability of innovation across the organization, really through innovation in action.
And so just as we start our conversation, I just want to remind folks that please input your thoughts, any perspectives, any questions that you have in the Q&A, questions in the Q&A, and just general commentary in the chat. And we'll really get back to that as we did last week. It actually really adds a lot of texture to the conversation. So Michelle, I'll start with you. And considering today's topic, pictures of the future, the second step in foresight and strategy in our COFA methodology. Why is it important? Why is it fundamental to building strategies that are not only resilient, but can best prepare organizations for future competitive advantage? Just talk us through that.
Thanks, Lita. So essentially, if we think about resilient strategies and what they are, resiliency implies that we are able to respond when we are confronted with unexpected circumstances. And so this requires us to look further out into the future. And with that, obviously, with looking into the future, we reduce our reliance on quantitative measures of data points. So what I'm going to do is just share a slide here with you to explain a few of the principles around strategic foresight, which is often coupled with scenario planning and strategic planning in itself. So where we look to demand drivers and solution drivers, which are often coupled as trends, those are still extrapolations, but they have a short to mid-term perspective. And as one of our participants pointed out last week, was to say, well, what if we miss those opportunities, and why should we look at behaviors manifesting in more immediate circumstances? And those play a very specific role in terms of helping us identify possible threats as well as opportunities. But when we need to look beyond into a mid to long-term perspective, into an outlook of more to 5 to 10 years, the reliance on the concrete data points becomes less stable. And that means that as we, over time, the further you look out, the more multiple scenarios arise. And that in itself gives us the opportunity to then look out with some sense of relevance, so providing a lens to what we need to look at, and then best prepare for the futures that we might find ourselves in as a business. So essentially, there is quite a big difference where environmental scanning is more of a continuous process. Strategic foresight and scenario planning is generally run on an annual basis. And this helps us build out the foundations of innovation strategy, which should be coupled with your business as usual operational and corporate strategy.
That sounds lucid, but someone might be asking themselves, how can you exactly understand the future or get a crystal clear vision of the future when the future itself is uncertain and intangible? And we've seen that in recent years. How would you speak to that?
Thanks, Lita. So in terms of understanding the future, what we need to do is look at our data. And this is a brilliant slide in the sense that it helps us see how over time, and looking out at that horizon, there are different data sources that we need to rely on. But essentially, wrapped in each one of those data sources, there are specific limitations. And so when we start looking out to our future, it might be to develop some sense of prognosis. So what might be coming in the next 6 months or possibly a year. And there we can look at reliable market forecasts or economic forecasts. And this is specifically where companies excel in terms of doing a lot of industry-based research. But when you start looking at, and this is the second point, know your horizon, when you start looking out at possibly horizon 2 or horizon 3 innovations, they generally produce productive outputs and results over a longer period of time. And so for us to be best prepared, we need to start extrapolating. And this is where the reliance on trends comes into play by projecting a 2 to 3 year outlook. And then further out, when we start looking at possibly delving into horizon 3 opportunities, it is best for us to start looking at scenarios so that we can actually be prepared for those multiple possibilities and plausible possibilities. So with each of these data points comes limitations. So obviously the accuracy, the further you go out, is quite limited, but then scenario. So the way that we compensate for this is to consider multiple scenarios as opposed to one very distinctive outcome or possibility. And whereas when you are looking at a market forecast, that is a very stagnant and concrete point of data that can't necessarily be built out into multiple opportunities. So you'll see this graph is really helpful in terms of understanding your innovation objectives, understanding what information you need in order to build the solutions from those points of data.
Great. I think I'll pivot to Rachel and ask you a question, Rachel. I remember you had mentioned in the previous session about your trend workshops and how the purpose of those workshops was to distill the most relevant information to your industry and innovation objectives, even though you were looking at trends that may not necessarily be stereotypically linked to the Smollen sort of model. And so can you tell us how that has formed the basis for scenario development and ultimately your opportunity space identification?
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Rita. And yes, I'd love to share just a few details about our experience last year when we followed the opportunity discovery process to inform the strategic development of our innovation department's solution roadmap. The final trend selection from our trend workshop formed the basis for our scenario development. You might remember from our discussion last week that we selected 21 trends collectively and collaboratively based on their projected potential to drive sustainable long-term growth and also, importantly, their strategic relevance to Smollen. Then, as an innovation department, we use this 2x2 matrix model to generate future scenarios. Using this collective scenario generation technique, we paired two drivers of the highest importance and greatest uncertainty for Smollen as axes. This created the 2x2 matrix and formed the basis for possible and multiple possible scenarios. The matrix really helped us create scenario narratives and generate highly contrasted scenarios. We used these scenarios to provide a context about how the future might evolve. We explored the changes that might alter, halt, or even accelerated our selected trends. And so the two drivers that we plotted were, one, exponential developments both in technology on the left, and then two, also transformative changes in society, economics, and politics below. We expanded our grid into a 2x4 matrix to better harness or better understand really the socioeconomic drivers at play. So let's just take a brief look at the different scenario narratives that we propose, moving from left to right. First, we have a future of economic crisis and climate catastrophe on the left. Next, a future in which businesses drive innovation and growth. We see consumerism and capitalism continue to grow in a space where people are looking to a for profit only means for growth. Next, if we move on, we see consumers taking a stand collectively for good. We see for community, social justice. We see businesses working for people, planet, and profit. Conscious capitalism, socialism, democracy, and globalization flourish. And then we see a scenario in which the government wields control, the likes of communism, state control, and fascism at play in the far right. Taking a step back, here is another scenario framework that we used as we worked to plot the future. The Four Futures framework was developed by Professor James Dater in the 1970s. The Four Futures framework says that all stories we tell about the future fall ultimately into one of these four distinct categories. First, growth. The systems and ways of being we live inside continue to develop along their current trajectory. To collapse, our current trajectory comes to a sudden halt, our systems and ways of being fall apart. Third, discipline. New forms of restraint and control are imposed on the present order to prevent collapse. And finally, fourth, transformation. Entirely new systems and ways of being are found. We transcend the present order. And here you will see that we plotted the Four Futures framework on top of our 2x4 matrix. So as we move from left to right, we move from collapse, then on to growth, transformation, and in that last one, discipline. Our next step was to overlay Smollen's strategic intent across the 2x4 matrix as we move to focus our opportunity discovery strategically. And so as we moved forward, we chose to continue the discovery of opportunities for Smollen on these four quadrants specifically. We decided that we wanted to build a future for planet, people, and profit, and not just profit. We also didn't want to look to create a world of collapse or discipline. And so let's pull our focus back quickly just to the axes. And again, our drivers. And on the left, we have technology. So we've extrapolated the society, economics, and politics axes. But when we looked at technology, we identified 3 different themes that were driving transformative change. One, we pulled out virtual worlds, as we saw a move from augmented to virtual reality. We looked at how AR makes digital alterations or additions to our existing environment, but VR immerses us fully in a virtual environment, one that is either artificially generated or emulates real-world surroundings other than our own. The second theme we looked to was hyperconnectivity, as we saw a move from the Internet of Things to an ever more hyperconnected ecosystem, kind of like the Internet of Things magnified. And then third, we looked to artificial intelligence, as we saw a move from humans using machines to humans and machines co-creating. So from programmed algorithms to predictive algorithms, from narrow artificial intelligence to artificial general intelligence. And so these 3 transformative drivers, paired with our socio-economic and political drivers, helped us create 12 different scenario stories.
Fantastic. There's a question directly to this in the chat from Tobias, who is asking, we see technology on the y-axis, we see society, economics, and politics on the x-axis, but where is the environmental consideration here in this analysis? Was there a specific reason why environmental was not included here, or is there any other rationale?
So I think it was, we looked to our 21 selected trends and the drivers that were at play within each of those 21. And from that, we found the commonalities. So I suppose in terms of relevance to us as an organization, environmental didn't come out as the strongest driver, but we did see it really as speaking to this element within society, economics, and politics when we speak to a world that's for community, for social justice, for people, planet, and profit. We saw it encompassed in the decisions and the directions that businesses and consumers were selecting and choosing, and the move forward in that direction. So I suppose it is what was dictated by the trends, what was relevant to us as an organization, and what moved forward through that process.
Okay, great. Fantastic. And Tobias, I hope that answers your question, but also to everybody else who's in this session, please feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A or any general comments in the chat. And Rachel, just staying with you. So, as innovators, we know that managers who sort of think outside the box and expand their imaginations to see a wide range of possibilities can take advantage of the unexpected changes that come along. And so can you tell us how you were able to get that buy-in and communicate the narrative that you're explaining here, especially considering how, scenarios can often be thought of as intangible?
I love this question, Nita. Thanks so much. The so what or the what's next. And so as an innovation department, we developed these future scenarios, but what did we do with them? And so during the opportunity discovery process, we really work future back. We first envision the future we want to create for Smollen before developing the roadmap that will take us there. I threw in this for a bit of fun, but it's really part of the process and the message we were communicating throughout opportunity discovery. Because to do this, we need to design, create, ideate, imagine, all these creative words. And we need to be creative in creating a portfolio of opportunity spaces. Remembering that opportunity spaces present a new future opportunity for Smollen. It's not a single solution at this stage. It is a collection of possible solutions that respond to an insight about the future. This really is a creative process, requiring real diversity of thought. And so what we did was bring a diverse team of executives from across different business unit functions and geographies within Smollen together to discover opportunities for Smollen. We ran a creative opportunity discovery workshop with the team. Those of you that were with us last week will remember that we spoke about the first law of creativity, that the quality and uniqueness of stimulus in has a direct impact on the quality and uniqueness of ideas out. For that opportunity discovery workshop, our scenarios were the stimulus in, and the opportunity spaces are the ideas that came out of it. In the build-up to the workshop, we shared all 12 of the future scenario stories I've just spoken about with our team, with the participants. So within the context of these predicted futures and with the support of current market evidence, we invited the team to explore the implications of the scenarios to uncover possible innovation opportunities for Smollen. The 12 stories are really illustrative narratives about a future world. The teams immerse themselves in the stories to gain a deeper understanding of what the future world could look like. Here I'll share. You can see we used an internal platform that we have to share all of those 12 stories with the teams for per technology theme. And each of them there on the right, you can see the narrative. It is a story, a world that we are bringing to life. We also attached an assortment of innovation examples or present day market evidence to each story. I'll just share here. And we asked the workshop participants to browse the inspiring examples and consider the potential, the opportunities that they demonstrate. We asked, could Smollen share in that innovation potential? After they had immersed themselves in the stories, we asked them to consider the practical implications of these future worlds. To dive a little deeper and browse these different scenario statements that we presented. These statements are really short scenarios that illustrate the way in which a story might play out. In preparation for the workshop, we asked each participant to select 3 scenario statements. Again, we've seen a world of multitude of opportunities and possibilities, but we need to narrow that down. They were asked to select scenarios that could contribute to Smollen's strategic direction, could utilize Smollen's capabilities and competencies, that could potentially derive a number of opportunities for Smollen, scenarios that could open up a broad market area for Smollen to explore. Then these selected scenarios, these little insights about the future, were used to inform opportunity space creation during the workshop. At the workshop, we invited participants to really embrace the mindsets of curiosity, empathy, collaboration, and experimentation as they imagined and created the future together.
Great. Thank you so much. That makes sense. And then I think the last question I want to ask you before moving on to Q&A and asking Michelle a few questions is, we've spoken about this idea of moving from agnostic trends and emerging technologies and this idea of the value of divergence at this stage of the innovation process. Could you elaborate that for our audience?
Yes, definitely. Let me pull up here. This diagram I really love, and it really illustrates the full opportunity discovery process that we followed, working from trends to future scenarios to opportunities, all to identify potential innovation opportunities for Smollen within specifically the changing commerce industry. And it really does a good job of highlighting both the divergent and the convergent nature of this creative process. As a business, and more specifically as a rather small innovation department, we cannot respond to all of the trends, to all of the future scenarios, or develop all of the opportunity spaces. So we diverge, yes, to expand our horizons, but then we have to converge and we have to prioritize and select a number of opportunity spaces to pursue. So if we start from the beginning, just to recap really from last week, together we explored trends and then we selected trends. And so collaboratively, we rated the trends on both their projected potential to drive sustainable long-term growth, but also very importantly, their strategic relevance to us as Smollen, as a commerce solutions provider. We then, those ratings guided which trends we prioritized and responded and will respond to in the years ahead. After that, we as an innovation team then mapped multiple futures. So again, we diverged and we explored those potential futures before selecting the most impactful scenarios. And really that is so important that converging again, we had to evaluate these scenarios on both their desirability and their impact. So desirability, we explored whether or not the scenario could contribute to Smollen's strategic direction. Would exploring the scenario utilize Smollen's capabilities and competencies, but then also impact. So exploring whether or not this scenario could derive a number of opportunities for Smollen. Would it open up broader markets for Smollen? And then these selected scenarios really informed the creative opportunity space development. So again, we diverged, but we had to converge. We couldn't explore all of the opportunity spaces. We have to prioritize and select what will move forward and what will make its way onto our innovation roadmap.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. That's very clear. I am curious to bring Michelle back in and maybe get her to answer this question from Veronica, which is quite an interesting one. It's what happens when the company strategy has to change abruptly due to a force majeure, such as COVID, for example? Michelle, do you want to maybe speak to that?
Sure. Well, these are the black swan events that we speak to when we talk about scenario planning. And though COVID took us all by surprise, and most people had not prepared for it, but essentially, this is the purpose of scenario planning. The scenario planning process, in essence, is for us to look at what might happen, so that we are best prepared for even the worst scenarios. So actually, just considering that, I'll show this this image. Here we can look at both positive and the worst case scenario. As with Rachel's extrapolated scenarios, they moved that right out to fast, I can never pronounce it, but right towards the extremist view of the world that can potentially hold a very negative space. So we're not only looking to prepare for the best outcomes. As what Rachel has stated, is that we play a very broad responsibility in building a positive future. And so that future back process is critical in terms of looking at the positive scenario space and working backwards in terms of developing a clear roadmap of activities. But by looking at the negative scenario spaces, we are able to best prepare so that we don't need to drop everything when something as critical as COVID arises, and so that we can actually see those black swans before they arise.
Fantastic.
I hope that helps, Veronica.
Great answer. I wonder if there's any follow-up questions that people want to add, or maybe, Michelle, if there's anything else around this idea of scenario planning and what it entails that you'd want to elaborate on.
Sure. I think that just in essence, it's important to understand that in the context of business planning, scenarios are essentially those sequences of events that we are projecting into the future. And so, as what Rachel has mentioned, it is critical for us to actually engage in some sense of storytelling and building narratives that are plausible and consistent. And so a colleague of mine, Tassilo, who was with us last week, he was explaining the process to me in terms of how we might look to find those consistent and distant combinations that actually stand true. And so for this, we really we make use of our platform predominantly to look at each of those trends selected. So it's essential to find relevance first, so that the stories are not just stories, but they hold industry relevance or relevance pertaining to our objectives moving out into the future. And then we move through this process. So if you like, we can talk about the 4 steps, but perhaps there might be additional questions that you have there, Lisa.
You can keep going. I think people
okay, brilliant. So just in terms of that situation analysis, this is where we uncover the drivers that are behind the trends. So generally, like what Rach has mentioned, taking the 21 selected trends and looking deeper into that and what are the bigger themes that come through. So when we are addressing multiple drivers, It's very helpful to make use of a rating tool to better assess what will have significant impact and what will increase or decrease dramatically. And quite often when we are assessing these key drivers, it is very helpful to bring in external viewpoints and specifically looking at specialists. So if we are to start looking towards sustainable futures, there are quantified viewpoints of what possible scenarios might actually take place. There are specialists who have extrapolated data to be able to give a much more sound view of the possible scenarios. And then for us to look at those combinations and actually assess, okay, is this possible when we put two trajectories on an axis together? Where Rachel's is very valid in terms of looking at the technology as well as a human response. And it's the same if we were to take, for instance, sustainability and the current state of the world against technology, and actually mapping that out on a grid to see what are the possible implications. And once we have a clear view of those future worlds and the stories that they tell, what we advise is for individuals to really map that out. We quite often advise that you use the roadmap because it's a timeline. So you can actually see how far out that is in terms of having a distant future that you might need to address. And then from there, use those scenario statements as the basis to create possible solutions, or like in Rachel's instance, find new opportunity spaces to explore. So in essence, this is quite a lengthy process. It's highly engaging. I think it holds a lot of value when you have more collaborative participation in this process. But in terms of the value that it delivers, it's highly strategic. And so therefore it's worthwhile engaging in it on an annual basis.
Fantastic. I'm just checking. There's one more question, and it could either be Rachel or Michelle who takes this on before we close out, is how can we document strategic responses and how can we test them?
I think I would need to understand what we term as strategic responses. So if that is the case of building out opportunity spaces, as with most innovation processes, what we would then do is go and explore further into that opportunity space. So you would gather new data. So as with Rachel's view, where we are diverging and converging, you would then diverge again, but with a very specific view of what data is relevant to that opportunity space. Quite often, if it is a very technology-based opportunity, there would be a lot of R&D involved and prototyping, and then that documentation and those lessons learned are then reincorporated into the process so that you continually have a feedback to bring it down to a more concise solution that is released. Rach, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that one. I hope that it was an understandable answer, at least.
No, definitely. I think I would just reiterate what you're saying, maybe with an example. One of our opportunities that came out of our scenario exploration was really around the world of e-commerce. We've traditionally functioned within a brick and mortar store. And as we see the world changing and developing, what does that mean for us? And also across our different markets. So different markets are developing at different paces. And so we really have to dive into that as an opportunity space to further explore and understand just the scope of the opportunity and what that could look like for us, and where and how we would play within that space. And so what we have done is this opportunity space of e-commerce. We have dived into a project mapping out the landscape within different markets, understanding the size of the opportunity within those different markets, really doing market research to understand the needs or the challenges or the gaps, the white spaces, we all know those words, but within those environments, actually having to go out and engage with the market to understand the market needs that are at play, and how we could work to solve those, to offer a solution within that space, and to better understand not just the market potential for us, but also the financial viability for us as an organization. Does it make sense for us to play within that landscape? And so, yes, lots of imagination and creativity in the start of this process, but as we narrow down, we have to get a lot more granular as we work to create a solution and to deliver.
Perfect. Folks, believe it or not, we've actually come to the end of our session. And I want to just extend a warm thanks to Rachel and to Michelle for coming today and sharing their insights with us. I'm just going to share my screen just to remind folks that this was the second leg out of 5. And next week, we're going to have our Director of Strategic Business Development, Christopher Robertson, as well as Rachel again, talking about how to identify action and goals based on opportunity spaces. And the idea of planning and goals is going to be what they're speaking about. So next week, same time, 3 p.m. Central European Standard Time. And we really, really, really look forward to seeing you folks again. Everything we've discussed today will be in a condensed mailer along with an abridged version of this video. And yes, any additional questions, maybe bring them next week, or any additional reflections over the next week, please bring them to the session. So thank you so much to Rachel. Thank you so much to Michelle. And we'll see everybody next week.